Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money. And like number 45, we also sometimes struggle with the difference between would and wouldn't. Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we have been off for a bit of a little break, Malcolm, but we are back and in action. What's going on, man? How you feeling?
A little summer hiatus, never hurt anybody.
It's like summer break, man. Those were great back in the day when we were children.
You ever notice how short summer break is for kids? Like, I am completely offended for kids how short their summer break is now.
Okay.
But I completely understand for the parents how happy they are that their kids are only out like 7 weeks or something at this point.
Really?
I don't know what it really is, but it's something like that. Like, literally, it's like 7 or 8 weeks now, where we used to get like a
It was
whole
3
summer.
months.
Right. Now, kids are back in school like ASAP.
Oh, wow.
So, you know.
Sucks to be born in the 2000s, I guess.
For a whole bunch of different reasons, yeah.
For sure. Well, of course, this is another episode of Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We've been off for a second. We had some scheduling things we had to take care of, but we're back with another conversation about money. And in this episode, we're talking about 10 years after the Great Recession. Malcolm, that's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
Because it's like literally 10 years post about, right?
And also, folks, like, when you say 10 years since the Great Recession, folks are like, really?
Right.
That seems like just yesterday.
It feels like it sometimes.
However, we'll get into it a little later. People's behavior doesn't necessarily reflect that it seems like just yesterday. But
Absolutely,
anyway.
absolutely. Also, in the news, LeBron James is a Laker now. I just want to, like, make that point as a
Lakers fan, how do you feel about that?
It's interesting. When I heard the news, I was sitting at a bar with a friend from high school, actually. His name's Jamal Harris. We were sitting there. I hadn't seen Jamal basically since high school, and he was in town. And my wife texted me, LeBron goes to Lakers for such and such $1 million. And I literally at the hotel bar, like, screamed out loud. Not out of happiness, but just, like, out of, like, pure shock that it was, like, happening.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're indifferent, it sounds like?
It's not indifference. It's just like it's kind of surreal.
Okay.
I've never would have imagined that would be the story that LeBron kind of wrote for himself. And it's especially odd because when he first came into the league, I was one of them people like, he ain't gonna be nothing.
Were you really?
I was in high school though.
You were like the 1%.
That was early when he was just stepping into the league.
They were calling that dude the phenom, like when he was like 13. So
Yeah.
you were like the 1% who didn't see the potential.
Indeed. So things come full circle. But as we do on every show, it is now time for headlines. New game show called Paid Off offers the chance to eliminate student loan debt. And this was a story that ran in July of 2018 on NBCnews.com by Daniel Arkin. A new game show on True TV offers contestants an altogether more practical and perhaps somewhat depressing prize, the chance to get out from under mountains of crippling student loan debt. Well, how do I get my application to go on this game show? I need it.
So I'm sure we can get you on there.
Okay. We need to figure out a way to get me on Paid Off. It's on True TV. Paid Off, a new trivia show that premiered in July, has a topical premise, to say the least. It debuts as some 45 million Americans find themselves buried under student loan debt, including roughly 60% of college graduates who owe an average of $37,000. Americans collectively owe upwards of $1.4 trillion in student loan debt, a staggering sum that helps explain why so many 20 to 30-somethings have struggled to gain a foothold in the middle class, effectively cutting them off from home ownership and investments. Michael Torpey, who was quoted in the piece, who's actually the person who like pitched the show to True TV, he's also the host. He said, "We're playing in a weird space of dark comedy. As a comedian, I think a common approach to a serious topic is try to laugh at it first, and we kind of try to do that here on our show.
Laugh to keep from crying.
Indeed. The ground rules are fairly straightforward. There are 3 contestants, like normal game shows, where there's 3 contestants at a time, all of whom must carry some college debt. They go head-to-head on a series of trivia questions, including a few related to education, If they provide the correct answer on enough brain teasers, the show will cover up to 100% of their loans, which sounds like an amazing prize.
Up to 100%. So I'm caught in the weeds right there.
That was a little weird when I was reading that. I was like, what is up to?
Like,
100?
I wonder
what?
if they're really just gonna knock off $2,500, $4,000, or something like that.
If they're gonna do it, they need to do it for whoever. Unless they're like gonna screen by saying, Ben, you can't come on because you have too many student loans. It needs to be like whatever you cover.
So I thought about this when I saw the commercial, and the person who wins Jeopardy 5 nights in a row wins like $75,000-ish.
Oh wow!
You've got to be Jeopardy smart and win 5 times in a row to get $75,000. So this is just regular old Dr. Seuss trivia questions,
right?
And it's on True TV.
Right.
So I've got a feeling they're not going to pay you Jeopardy money for this. So then that means you probably are talking about far less prize money. So now I'm kind of like, are we just on here to get our Instagram followers up, or are we actually paying off some debt?
Right. That's an interesting question. But when you put it in Jeopardy terms, it makes a lot more sense. I'm like, oh, now I don't feel as like, y'all need to be paying everything. I just feel like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Jeopardy doesn't do it, so why would they?
Yeah.
There is an interesting part of this story. Some critics have already pounced on the premise of the show, suggesting that the very concept is flippant and insensitive. I don't know if I agree with that. But question for you, Malcolm. Are you down for a game show where paying off student loans, even if it was like the full amount of your student loans, is that like a cool prize? Is that a game show you're for?
100% yes.
Okay.
100%. The reason I say that so emphatically is because of how many game shows there are out there right now.
Right.
I'm thinking The Price is Right, for example, maybe Family Feud,
right,
where they give away prizes, namely cars,
sure,
that you don't even want.
Right.
Like, what am I going to do with a Fiat? I'm 6'1". So when you think about things like that, I'd much rather have the student loans. That's a tangible gift that, I can do something with, rather than, the barbecue grill, or the barbecue grill tongs and
the barbecue
the
set,
spatula,
right?
And that's all you get.
Right.
So I'd much rather have this thing that's tangible, that's going to help me out in the future, assuming they actually pay off student loans in a meaningful kind of way.
Do you have to pay taxes on that? I literally just thought about that. You would have to pay taxes. I would
it's
like
the same
say,
as if you won the lottery.
I would say like you guys log into my account. And then you guys
Make a
pay it off
payment
with your credit card. Leave me out of it. I don't even want to be a part of it.
Oh, they're going to send you a 1099 at the end of the year. Don't you worry. They're going to shift that tax liability to you.
Clearly, I have thought about whether or not if I got some kind of deal to have my loans paid off, I wouldn't want to be a part of it, because then there might be a way to like say, oh, it wasn't income. They just logged into my account and paid it for me.
Good luck with that. I got a feeling, unless you're running for president of the United States, there's the caveat.
Right.
They're going to be looking at those IRS records and scrutinizing upside down.
Okay.
Did this dude pay us what he owes us?
So the key is run for president and then withhold information about your taxes.
And then withhold all the information about your taxes. That's the only way I've seen in my whole lifetime how you get away with it.
That is hilarious. So a little bit more of a serious question. I don't know if this will end up being a serious answer. What does this say about our world that we're living in when, $1.4 trillion in student loan debt collectively across the U.S.? That somebody was like, I'm going to make a game show, and you guys should pick up this game show. And then someone did pick up the game show. Like, what does that say, like, where we are at?
I don't know. I mean, full disclosure, I take this a little bit lightly, I think, because I don't have $100,000 in school loans that are like staring me in the face every time I do like a net worth analysis in my brain. So I can't necessarily come at it from the perspective of a person that's like, this is a serious life situation, and
like the person
you guys are joking about it. But at the same time, I think there's far worse we could do with entertainment.
That's true.
And far worse we have done with entertainment. Keeping Up with the Kardashians, for example, comes to mind. Housewives of this and Real Hip Hop and whatever. Like, those things to me are far worse for our psyche as people than a game show about trivia. Right. And we're going to pay off your student loans. Because if you think about the opposite, are you smarter than a fifth grader? Right. Those are little kids that are 10 years old who are competing in trivia questions against adults who are supposedly paying for college with their knowledge base and, the money they earn from these trivia questions, right? So now you're just doing the inverse. You're going on a game show to pay off the education you got already instead of being 10
as an adult,
prepaying for the education. So I mean, it's the same thing in that respect. But you know, I do understand how you could feel like folks are making light of a serious situation.
Absolutely. That's hilarious. Want to remind people you're listening and watching Manage Your Damn Money. Our conversation at hand today on this episode, 10 years after the Great Recession. But before we get into that, we want to remind people you can always catch past episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Simply search Manage Your Damn Money, and we will come up. Please remember, leave us a review and give us a rating, because that'll help us go up in the ratings, help more people find our show. And if you have questions or you want to send a question to Malcolm from Malcolm's Money Minute, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And of course, you can always follow us on social media. Malcolm, what's your handle on Twitter and Instagram?
At Malcolm on Money.
And of course, mine is at MYDM with a 1 on the end. That's on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, Facebook, facebook.com/Manage Your Damn Money. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where on this episode we are handling a very interesting conversation 10 years after the Great Recession. Upon exiting graduate school, I took my shiny new master's degree and my 1-year-old undergraduate degree to the top of the food chain, working as a sales associate at Banana Republic, then as a waiter at the Matchbox restaurant on Rockville Pike in Rockville, Maryland.
Man.
And finally, and not lastly, as an assistant manager at Sunglass Hut inside of a Macy's at the Lake Forest Mall in Gaithersburg, Maryland.
Getting your money's worth.
This was getting my money's worth at the max. Oh, don't worry. At that Macy's, I was an assistant manager, but there was no manager.
Okay.
So
okay.
Anyway, those were the days many college graduates remember and full-grown adults remember. It was the aftermath of the Great Recession of 2008, the result of an overinflated housing market, and led out by our favorite president, number 44. We're looking at the Great Recession 10 years later. Malcolm, what were you doing, or what was your memory of life when the recession of 2007, 2008 hit?
So fortunately or unfortunately, I was still in college in 2008,
right.
When this whole thing, started to collapse.
Right.
I say fortunately because I was shielded from the reality of, getting laid off from a job or home being foreclosed on, not being able to pay for my kids' tuition anymore, all those kind of real things that people were dealing with. But then on the flip side, I've been part of the generation that coming out of it is like, okay, I'm graduating, but where are the jobs?
Right.
Okay, there are jobs, but they're willing to pay me the same thing as I'd be able to make if I were an assistant manager at a clothing store. Like, we're going to come back to how you get to be a side and there's no main.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, so I mean, like, it's a catch-22, I guess.
Yeah.
If I had known any better, maybe I would have listened to my mom and like stayed in school longer.
Right.
Because then it could have delayed the inevitable. But fortunately, I graduated with a job that I was like anxious to pursue. So it was like,
That was my strategy. Like, when I left Hampton University as an undergrad in 2009, the only plan I had was to go to grad school. I applied to one school and got in. And I was like, yep, that's all I'm doing. I didn't apply to a job.
I had a lot of friends that were like, I'm going straight to grad school. There's no job that I need to be worried about jumping into. And I was like, the complete opposite. Like, I couldn't wait to get out of college to go to work, because the whole 4 years I was in college, I felt like school was the thing in the way of me being successful. So it's interesting how everybody else's perspective was like, I won't be anything if I don't go to school more.
Right.
And I was like, school has been holding me back. So now I'm out here, world. What's going on?
That's hilarious. I got there like a half a year, because the program I was in was a full year.
Mm-hmm.
Halfway through, I was literally like, homework is a swindle. There's no point. Why am I doing homework? And then that's around when I just started doing what I had to do to get through, rather than being like the excellent student.
Right.
Graduated or whatever.
Here's what's interesting though, when I think about it in retrospect. So I worked at Home Depot when I was in college, my sophomore year, and I guess like part of my junior year. And at the time I was working there, I physically saw with my own two eyes the traffic slow down. So the housing market was slowing down and collapsing right in front of my eyes.
Wow.
Because as I'm coming into work every weekend, every evening, but specifically on the weekends, the store manager is coming telling me, hey, you got to let some folks in your department go home early.
Yeah.
And so hours started going from 40 to 38 to 32 to 30 to 25, like just continuously trickling down. And I'm like, well, why is it that you guys are constantly cutting hours? And they're like, well, we don't have a whole lot of customers coming in.
Right.
So first it's the regular general public who's fixing up a house and doing, main stuff like you and I would. But then the big money comes from the contractors who are working on bigger projects and building houses.
Who are there every day.
Those people started disappearing, and it didn't occur to me until I'm thinking about this in hindsight. But that was the makings of the slowdown that I didn't, know was inevitably following 6 months ish behind.
Right, absolutely.
So, interesting.
And that's an interesting background and color to give you a perspective on what Wikipedia has to say about the Great Recession. The Great Recession was a period of general economic decline observed in world markets during the late 2000s and early 2010s. The scale and timing of the recession varied from country to country. In terms of overall impact, the International Monetary Fund concluded that it was the worst global recession since the Great Depression in the 1930s. The cause of the recession largely originated in the United States, good old United States of America, particularly the real estate market, though policies of other nations also contributed. According to the U.S. National Bureau of Economic Research, the official arbiter of U.S. recessions, the recession as experienced in that country, or our country, began in December of 2007 and ended in June of 2009. So that was a really long, almost 2-year period, thus extending over 19 months. The Great Recession was related to the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008, and also what people might have seen in the movie The Big Short.
Right.
The subprime mortgage crisis of 2008 and 2009. The Great Recession resulted in scarcity of valuable assets in the market economy and the collapse of the financial sector and banks in the world economy. And of course, we know the story that the banks were bailed out eventually by the U.S. government, giving a loan. A couple of companies failed. So real quick, Malcolm, give us like the real quick and simplified version of the pins that got knocked out from under the house, so to speak, that made everything crash and fall.
So essentially the word I would use to make it easy is leverage. So leverage being using credit to buy the next thing,
right,
but doubling down and tripling down on the same asset. So I own a house. I take out a loan to buy the house. That's mortgage number one.
Right.
Then I take out a second mortgage not more equity in the house, not a bigger house, not a different house, but a second mortgage on the exact same assets. And now I've doubled my leverage on that house.
Okay.
Now I take out a third mortgage on that same house. Banks were actually allowing people to triple up mortgages on that one asset. So now I've got 3 loans, but 1 house to back it.
And what was the purpose of that?
So that I could go out and buy more stuff. So
Oh,
now I'm
wow.
driving around in a Bentley. Now I've got a
Wow.
vacation home that I also bought with the money that I pulled out of that house. Now I've got, you know, all these other things that I bought that really we found out in the grand scheme of things aren't worth very much, because if they were, when the banks repossessed them, they would have had a little bit more of a leg to stand on.
Right.
So anyway, on the one hand, you have people doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the other side of it, you have the banks that are actually lending the money that are selling these mortgages off.
Right.
And so they're selling mortgage number 1, and they're selling it for, you know, the going rate. Then they're selling mortgage number 2, which is a little bit more risky than mortgage number 1.
Right.
So mortgage number 2 comes with a little bit more of a premium.
Right.
So now you buy mortgage number 2.
Right.
And then I sell to someone else mortgage number 3, which, because it's more risky than the first 2, comes with even more of a premium.
Right.
So now all 3 of those mortgages have been sold off to somebody else who's speculating on my ability to pay off those loans.
Right.
Everybody knows I can't pay off those loans because you've seen the financials. I just don't have the income to support it.
Right.
But we don't care. We're making money off of being able to sell those mortgages.
Right.
And we know that if it hits the fan, the United States government is going to step in and bail us out anyway.
Right.
So what do we care?
Mm-hmm.
And then essentially what happened is it became very apparent that everybody around the country didn't have the ability to pay off those loans the way they contracted to.
And then everybody was not paying off loans at the same time.
And then everybody at the exact same time is not paying off those loans. And
Right.
so you have this perfect storm where everybody's having to have that home repossessed at the same time, which means the market is flooded with homes to be auctioned off at foreclosure auctions,
Right.
and nobody has the money to buy them.
Right.
On the flip side, you've got these banks that created the sales of those mortgages that people are actually investing real dollars in. And now you see the aftermath, which is
Right.
everybody stuck holding the bag except the banks that lent that money in the first place.
Indeed, indeed. One interesting bit of color I wanted to add earlier. I was a time when I saw a lot of stories on the news about like the 47-year-old PhD double master degree, engineer who was bagging groceries at the local grocery store.
It was interesting.
It was definitely a time, like I remember those
It
stories.
was very
vividly.
discouraging, I would say, from that perspective. But
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
the flip side, though, as you know, I bought a townhouse when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
But what I may or may not have ever told you, I don't remember. I was 19 at the time.
Right.
I had a part-time job working at Home Depot. And I don't think they ever even asked me to prove my income.
Wow.
So I got approved for a mortgage to buy a house with a part-time job as a full-time student, and nobody asked me to prove income.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Essentially is what the crux of the whole housing market problem was. No cosigner.
They probably should have let you buy that house.
No,
Malcolm.
under no circumstances does the model support me
Right.
being able to. And I mean, I actually, so I had decent credit. I had over a 700 credit score. I had actual income.
Right.
So if they dug into it enough, I probably could have proven that I had the income to support the house that I was buying.
Right.
But they approved me for a mortgage 3 times the amount of house I actually bought.
Oh,
And fortunately, in having conversation with my mom, she's like, buy what you can afford.
Right.
I don't know, she probably said that 40 times. And so I actually bought what I could afford, but the mortgage they approved me for was like $300,000 or something.
They were like, "Oh, crazy boy."
At 19 with a part-time job. So that essentially is what caused everybody to
Right.
go crazy. And,
Indeed. Some additional details for you. Investopedia.com, one of Malcolm's favorite websites, has the origins and consequences of the Great Recession and explain it this way. During the American housing boom of the mid-2000s, financial institutions began marketing what Malcolm just explained, mortgage-backed securities and sophisticated derivative products at unprecedented levels. When the real estate market collapsed in 2007, these securities declined in value, jeopardizing the solvency of over-leveraged banks and financial institutions in the U.S. and Europe. Malcolm, you basically just explained that. Although the global economy was already feeling the grip of a credit crisis that had been unfolding since 2007, things came to a head a year later with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, the country's 4th largest investment bank, in September of 2008. When did you buy your house?
September of 2007.
Okay, so a full year before. Okay.
Yeah.
The contagion quickly spread to other economies around the world, most notably in Europe. As a result of the Great Recession, the United States alone shed more than 7.5 million jobs at the time, causing its unemployment rate to double. Further, American households lost roughly $16 trillion of net worth as a result of the stock market plunge, Malcolm. And then also it goes on to say on Investopedia.com, according to a 2011 report by a Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, the Great Recession was avoidable. The appointees, which included 6 Democrats and 4 Republicans, cited several key contributing factors that they said led to the downturn. First, the report identified failure on the part of the government to regulate the financial industry. And then this included the Fed's inability to curb toxic mortgage lending. So a lot of those people getting loans like you for 3 times what they could afford. Next, there were too many financial firms taking on too much risk. The shadow banking system, which included investment firms, grew to rival the depository banking system, but was not under the same scrutiny or regulation. And then, of course, when shadow banking system failed, the outcome affected the flow of credit to consumers and businesses. Other causes identified in the report included excessive borrowing by consumers and corporations and lawmakers who were not able to fully understand the collapsing financial system.
So here's something interesting that you just reminded me of as you were going through that. Do you remember when you were in 2007, 2008, maybe even 2009? Well, not in 2009, but do you remember how many people you came across that would say they were day traders?
Yeah, I do. I vaguely remember that being a thing.
Have you met any recently?
No.
There's why. So you were saying, why would people take out second and third mortgages on their house?
Right.
What a lot of people were doing is taking out that second or third mortgage,
right,
quitting their jobs and becoming quote unquote day traders. And so they were leveraging their one asset, investing in the market because things were going so well. They were doubling and tripling down on the market.
Right.
And in the process of making those investments in the market with the money they had just borrowed against the house that they initially borrowed against in the first place,
right,
they lost twice over because you lost the money that you invested in the market that you now owe, I don't know, 10-ish, 20% interest on that loan.
Right.
And then you lost the asset that you borrowed against in the first place. And so I think it'll be a while before we ever hear anybody else call themselves day traders again. But then they call themselves Bitcoin traders. So maybe it hasn't. So we'll see. I don't know.
Indeed. Well, we want to remind people you're listening to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We're going to take another quick music break, but when we come back, we're going to continue talking about the Great Recession, as in the summer of 2008, we are about 10 years down the line from the initial hit of the Great Recession. We want to remind people that you can always listen to past episodes of the show. Just go to Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, or Spotify and search Manage Your Damn Money. Of course, leave us a rating and a review. Tell us how we're doing on those platforms. That helps more people see the show. If you have a question for us or for Malcolm on Malcolm's Money Minute, you can send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And of course, if you want to follow us on the gram, you can do so. Malcolm, what's your handle?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And of course, mine is @MYDM with a 1 on the end. And of course, you can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we are discussing 10 years after the Great Recession. As we've been discussing, it's been 10 years since the Great Recession of 2008, and we're taking a look at where we've come since that event affected so many people in so many different ways. Malcolm, for those people who are maybe too young or like legit children during that time, how would you describe or how would you like explain to them what it was like? Like, what are you going to tell your grandkids? Boy, when in 2008, things was crumbling. What would you say?
So fortunately, I wasn't responsible for anybody other than myself. So
Sure.
2008 for me wasn't as bad as it was for a lot of other people, right? So if things really went as bad as they possibly could have gone, like folks were afraid of, for us, you know, it would have been bad, but not as bad.
Sure.
So, you know, the stories I'll tell my grandkids will probably be inflated because it'll be so many years down the road that I get to take poetic license.
Right.
But realistically, I think just observing other people, like you mentioned the folks on the news who are like grown adults with graduate degrees working, you know, for minimum wage, that kind of stuff. Seeing that everywhere you looked was very depressing. But then also you had the Occupy Wall Streeters, right? The people who decided they had had enough and they were going to show up on Wall Street every single day and demand answers from, you know, the CEOs of the largest banks and blah, 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 blah. That didn't really yield any results in hindsight.
No, it didn't.
But that whole thing and the coverage of that on the news day in and day out, that also made it seem like, you know, the world's really going to come to an end. Kind of like, you know, what we got through the 2016 election, where it was like, oh my God, the world's going to come. It was the same thing, like, you know, so.
And we're still here. So some additional information also from Investopedia. 10 years after the Great Recession, where are we now? So Investopedia says the aggressive policies of the Federal Reserve and other banks at the time, though not without criticism, are widely credited with preventing an even greater damage to the global economy. For example, the Fed lowered a key interest rate to nearly zero to promote liquidity, and an unprecedented move provided banks with a staggering $7.7 trillion in emergency loans, which is crazy. In 2010, President Barack Obama signed the Dodd-Frank Act, which we've talked about a couple times on the show, to give the government some regulatory power over the financial sector. The act allowed the government some control over the financial institutions that were deemed near the verge of failing and to help put in place consumer protections against predatory lending.
So one that you left out also was the auto bailout. Because at the same time that the banks
I almost forgot about the auto bailout.
They stood to fail. Well, I mean, it was a big deal. Remember the whole Cash for Clunkers promotion that they had going on, where the federal government
that was in the Great Recession time, right?
Yeah, that stemmed from the Great Recession, and the federal government said the second most important piece to our economy is the automotive industry, because if we allow GM and Chrysler and Ford to fail, then that's an entire state basically that will disappear in Michigan. So we've got to do something to bail them out if we're going to bail out the entire state of New York, whose main, you know, export is banking. Right. So it's interesting that between the two of them, you know, trillions of dollars going out to save, with a big T, going out to save folks' jobs for one, but also these large conglomerates that, frankly, they would have been okay one way or another. I'm not that worried about them.
For sure. Real quick, though, since then, 10 years later, we are now seeing the Dow Jones Index at record levels, which is 25,000 in the range. I don't know what it was today. And then also, as of April 2018, I mean, it's currently July, unemployment rates of 3.9%, which is really low. Now, so some people will be critical of that because some people have like bowed out of the workforce altogether. Right. But still, you know, for the purposes of counting how many people are unemployed or employed, that's a pretty low number. I
mean, even if that number, say 3.9 was really 5 after we really did the math. Well, it was 10 in 2008. So, I mean, even half of that number is still staggering. Better. Thanks, Obama, by the way. But anyway, as you were.
So, Malcolm, talk to me a little bit about a few of the regulations. We mentioned Dodd-Frank. We talked about some of the bailouts. What were some of the other things that happened to the banking, financial services industry after all the, you know, fire and they started trying to put things together? What were some of the things that happened?
So one rule that was put in place that I, even as unfortunately, I would have to consider myself an insider
right.
in the banking and financial services industry. Even I have to agree with is the rule that basically separated a bank's ability to invest their own money and invest clients' money together.
Right.
So that's one thing that was happening is folks were selling their clients mortgages that they themselves purchased or issued to folks like you and me. Okay. So I was able to buy a house, then they sold off the mortgage, then they invested their own clients' dollars in those same mortgage pools that collapsed, unbeknownst to a lot of clients too, because who's going to take the time to read through page 326 of a investor document that comes out at the end of the year, right? So the Dodd-Frank Act took away banks' ability to double down in that way, which I think is key because you had folks who were selling these mortgages and collecting millions of dollars in bonuses, and then as it hit the fan, they still got to get their bonus. So I'm not discouraged one bit from acting unethically to make $1 if you're not even going to penalize me by taking back some of the money that I made. So that's one that I think was key. But then also they set up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is right now in the process of being dismantled. But for 10 years, it was great. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau basically put in place laws that prohibited folks from collecting debts in predatory ways. It also prohibited them from issuing debts in predatory ways. Like, you know, at one point, part of what led to the housing crisis in the way that it did, some banks were actually, and this has been found and proven and litigated, it's not my speculation or paranoia, some banks were actually increasing the amount of percentage rate that they were selling loans to certain people for. Based on their race and ethnicity and not their credit worthiness. So there were some areas where you had doctors and lawyers and engineers and astronauts and people who make a pretty high salary who were still being given loans of, you know, almost double digits based on their race and ethnicity and the location of the home and nothing else. And so that is considered predatory lending. The CFPB now has stepped in to create oversight to make sure things like that don't happen. Again, that's being taken away, so buyer beware. You know, fool me once, shame on you. And it's down in Texas. I know they say it down in Texas. You know, can't get fooled again. That's what I'm saying.
Can't get fooled again. J. Cole made that a clear thing that we always remember. So all of what happened in 2007, 2008, in a lot of ways was a result of funky financial engineering.
That's a nice way to put it.
Creating weird products, like you explained a couple things just a couple seconds ago, which don't make sense. Like someone selling a mortgage to someone and then taking that and then doing something else with it, like that's not how it works. A loan is supposed to be paid, like given, and then you pay it back over time. Nothing else is supposed to happen in between, at least so we thought. Question is, has America learned its lesson, or are we bound to repeat this same mistake now or in the future?
You probably should ask somebody else who's not as pessimistic as I am when it comes to people and their human nature. Because like I'm looking at it now, and we've hit in the last year and a half peak subprime auto loan. So subprime folks who have a credit score of less than 640 are being given auto loans as if they were a person who had a credit score of 740. So just like the housing crisis, where basically they say we've run out of a pool of people who qualify for mortgages to issue mortgages to, so everybody above 640 got a mortgage, got a second mortgage. We don't have anybody else to sell this debt to. So now we've got to go below what's considered the prime market,
ideal market,
below 640, and start finding people in the 620, 600, 580, 570, 560, going once, going twice. Now we've got to go down deep in the barrel to find people to sell these car loans is what's happening now. So auto loans are becoming the new housing bubble, which is already, I think, starting to show signs of bursting because defaults are up over the last 6 months in a way we haven't seen before. So no, I don't think the banks learn their lesson. I don't think consumers learn their lesson, because people tend to have this attitude of, oh, well, the bank approved me for it, so that means I can afford it.
And therefore.
And so, you know, we'll see when those tow trucks start showing up in the middle of the night pulling those cars away. But between now and then, I guess I just sound like an old man screaming, "Get off my lawn."
Indeed. You know, me and my wife are moving into a house in a week and a half or so. So we'll see if we can afford it. I'll let you know. I'll report back. Real quick before we close this show, I've heard rumblings in the things that I read, you know, on the news or different kinds of articles. There are suggestions that another recession could be coming. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's at all warranted? Are there any writings on the wall that you see?
Well, I definitely think it's possible, just from a purely economic standpoint. Okay. All of the recessions that we've had, and I think it's important to define really quickly what a recession is. So a recession is really just 2 quarters of negative growth. Right. So instead of inflation being positive, where, you know, the thing that, well, we did a show on inflation. I won't belabor the point. Go back and listen. But instead of having positive growth in the year, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth equal a recession. Right. So it's very much possible that we could be headed for one because we have this impending trade war with China going on. Right. That's playing out in the news every time you look. Right. So in history, through the, you know, American history, every recession has had something to do with the trade war here, and here we find ourselves in the midst of one again. So yes, it's possible, I guess. Right. I have no idea when, or where, and how. The only part I really have for you right now is the why. Right. And, you know.
Indeed. Well, advice for Manager Damn Money: hide your kids and your wife and your money. We want to remind people that you can always catch past episodes of Manager Damn Money on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. And of course, please leave us a review on any of those platforms. That helps us go up in the ratings and helps more people catch our show. If you have a question for Malcolm or for our show, send it to us, info@managerdamnmoney.com. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter and Legram. My handle is @MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
Of course, you can also catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/ManagerDamnMoney. Thanks to our partners here at Montgomery Community Media once again for another amazing show. Until next time, be good with your money.
Peace.